They were, okay, tragedy number 2 was World War One. Communism would never have succeeded in Russia were it not for World War One. Now, World War One was the worst disaster in human history. If I was the devil planning how to really wreck the planet, I'd create World War One because it was a masterstroke. It defeated Russia, it defeated the Ottoman Empire, it defeated stability. It was the death knell of the British Empire, such as it was. And it created endless chaos, nationalism, mayhem, and then the aftershock of revenge, anti-Semitism, who's to blame? Well, it's obviously the Jews, you know, etc., etc. And it's been chaos ever since. So, and in the middle of that chaos, Bolshevism appeared as a sort of at least some kind of an explanation, right? You know, it. And in the middle of that chaos, I suppose that ruthless streak of Marxist we know it all type attitude just silenced the actual intellectuals of Russia, and they all had to flee the country. Lenin kicked them out on a philosopher's ship, including Sorokin, my hero, the sociologist of Harvard, and loads of others. A lot of them came to France. France became the haven, the refuge place for genuine intellectuals, as it has done throughout much of history, you know. So I think, to sum up, my answer to your question would be, I think Marxism was an opportunistic, disruptive analysis of history as total class conflict, and it therefore was able to seize power during the worst turbulent war in human history up to that point. It was like, you know, it was a disaster on a disaster, right? And that, I'm not saying that Lenin wasn't a person. I mean, he hung out in Switzerland a lot of the time, Lenin. You know, I think he was in Zurich, wasn't he? My tutor at the University of London, Professor Hanak, who was a Czech, he told me, showed me a book once, that Lenin had met Mussolini in exile in Switzerland. And they'd been discussing tactics, and they agreed that, you know, that you seize power, and then you rule from it. And the very first symbol Hanak showed me that the Bolshevik state had, before the red flag and the sickle and hammer, was the fasces of the fascist iconography that Mussolini used. So the Bolsheviks, consciously under Lenin, they stole Mussolini's ideas. I mean, it'd make a great play, The Day in the Cafe, with Mussolini and Lenin chatting about how to seize power. It's factual, it happened. And I don't agree with fascism, and I don't agree with Bolshevism, I don't agree with violence. So I would have much rather the Moses Hess, Tchaikovsky, Pierre Leroux type communists had won. Well, they didn't. But I still would like them to win. They're the good guys. Like, I think Gorbachev was one of those kind. The trouble is, when you get, they're perceived as softies, right? And then the hard people, get rid of them. You know, how can the genuine liberals, like in Switzerland, James Fasey, he was one of that kind, you know, the soft left, right? I don't know how he succeeded in Switzerland, and you've managed to succeed, you know, a sort of democracy with a conscience, as it were. And it's never gone down that totalitarian route. Because its democracy is so complex, you know. I hope that's true in America, and I hope that the American Constitution is robust enough to get rid of the Trump dictatorship bid. In Britain, it's looking dangerous because we don't have a written constitution. Do you have a written constitution? Do you?
Yeah, we do have. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really important when you get dictators turning up. And unfortunately, Britain, we don't have one. You see. And therefore they can do anything they want. As long as the Queen gives the nod, they can do anything. So we've got a sort of neo-fascist totalitarian dictatorship taking power in the name of the Queen.
Why you don't have a constitution in the UK? Or why the UK?
Well, because the system, the corrupt elites that have been running my country for quite a long time, the very wealthy elites who run the Conservative Party and have done since slavery was their mode of wealth accumulation, don't want anything written down because then they can get away with anything they want. It's deliberate. I mean, that's my honest answer. And as a Liberal Democrat and an activist, a social Liberal Democrat, I want a written constitution. It's part of our next, common sense and I mean, the Liberal movement has been wanting a written constitution since Jeremy Bentham, who was an expert in international law and constitutionalism, and Britain will be the last country in the world that they allow it to happen. But we will keep fighting for it because it's just logic, Okay, next question.
Yeah. I think maybe this question fits the whole thematic. It's about, we talked a lot before, there is a field in sociology, it's called Sociology of Ignorance. And how does this matter for peace? The kind of ignorancy around the world.
Can you pass me that book, that one, on the table? So, I mean, I've spent years as a philosopher, which I interpret in the traditional sense of a lover of wisdom, right? Searching for wisdom, reading books about every single theory of wisdom, studying in different religions and travelling all over the world, and loving wisdom. I thought that was my job, which it is, obviously. But then I discovered that people are still remaining impervious to wisdom. It's seems to be a rare thing. That, and in schools where I've taught philosophy and things, it's always regarded as slightly eccentric to what is this thing called philosophy, And when I watch the impact of mass media, the way that people can be brainwashed into, fatal political decisions. And I've just read, for instance, I was talking about the First World War, I've just read a very brilliant history by Scottish historians, a critique of the origins of World War I. And it looks as if the London-based media whipped up anti-German hatred in a deliberate ploy to make the war break out. Deliberately. It was, a con trick, because Germany was tricked into the war by the London-based media, and who represented the financial interests of the City of London. They wanted to destroy Germany before it became too powerful. And so that's an example of ignorance in action. So ignorance interests me as a historian of ideas, because as well as looking at wisdom and intelligence, you've got to look at ignorance and stupidity, because stupidity runs a lot of the world. World War I was an absolutely stupid idea, right? For everybody's sake. You didn't join it, Switzerland, very clever people.
Yeah, I don't know that.
But, and nor did Sweden, and nor did Holland. I mean, some intelligent countries kept out. But Britain went for it big time. And it was a totally stupid thing. I got involved in my peace work in Canada, nursing soldiers who'd fought in World War I in the 1970s. And they radicalised me because they told me about the horrors of World War I, and I could see they had their legs blown off. And their lives were in ruins. A lot of them were alcoholics. They were old veterans in a hospital. And that's where I pledged to try and stop World War III. I couldn't stop World War I, but I could stop World War III, which would be 1,000,000 times worse than World War I. So anyway, cut a long story short, it led me in about 2010 to realise that we have to study ignorance, scientifically and academically, where it comes from, what causes it. And there's different types of ignorance. There's individual ignorance, like I can't remember stuff. I'm ignorant, we're all ignorant. I can't remember. If I had a brilliant photographic memory of every single book I've ever read, I'd be an absolute genius. I'm completely, I can't remember half of it, do you know what I mean? And then it sometimes comes back, sometimes doesn't. So there's the individual ignorance, like memory, can't remember everything. Then there's sort of group ignorance, like my sect is the best, so we'll go and kill the other ones. My tradition is the best. My form of Marxism is the only one, so we'll kill the Trotskyites. This human innate desire to form little groups and cliques and then attack other groups. And that seems to be a social process, right? So that led me to look at sociology of ignorance, and I discovered there is a literature. And I wrote this. I wrote this book about 2010, and I wrote this essay called "On the Varieties of Ignorance: Towards a Critical Epistemology of Ignorance." So this is a sort of slightly ironic title, because epistemology means the scientific study of knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy. And yet I'm saying we need an epistemology of ignorance, because it's what stops, prevents and blocks knowledge. And I went through and I listed about, 30 kinds of ignorance. And I was inspired to do this work by working at the Institute of Education initially, where Professor Karl Mannheim was. Now, he founded the field called the Sociology of Knowledge. Mannheim is a great thinker. I didn't meet him, but people I knew had obviously worked with him. And he felt we need a sociology of knowledge, and I agree 100%. But I say, building on that idea, we also need a sociology of ignorance. We have to know how people like Trump can get away with what they've done, how Boris Johnson and Brexit can get away with it. How can people be suddenly dumbed down to a level of ignorance that is shocking to any genuine intellectuals? And if it can happen in Britain and America, it can happen anywhere, So that's why I've written this study on the sociology of ignorance. And, there are many different forms. One of the forms which I identified is in this book, Sophiophobia. I think this is maybe the most dangerous of all the types and the most difficult to find the counter remedy, right? Because, and I wrote this book when I was still a teacher in secondary schools. I would be talking to my class about whatever, great wise rabbis and Judaism, or great Islamic sages or whatever, or great Christian thinkers and all that, and they say, "Oh, shut up, we don't want to hear about this, they're just too clever by half, I just want to get back to my football game, or I want to, I don't want to know about all this stuff, shut up," kind of attitude. And sometimes very rudely expressed. And I realised that people, okay, why didn't they want to know about all this? Was because then they might have to take responsibility for society, why it is. And I realised there's a fear of wisdom in people. It can be that just, "Oh, shut up, I don't want to hear about it" type of attitude. Or it can be more, more deep. And if you trace it back to the Bible, I think the Bible is one long story about how humanity fell into a Sophiophobia trance. Because the story in the Garden of Eden is that we're offered the apple of knowledge, we take it reluctantly, and we've been afraid ever since, right? Especially of knowledge. Right? So my friend Dr. Zaki Badawi, a Muslim scholar, said the trouble with you guys in the West is you're all terrified of knowledge. Whereas we Muslims aren't, because we believe that God is the all-knowledgeable, the all-wise. And the greatest thinker among us can only get a tiny download. Muhammad, great prophet, only got a tiny bit of that wisdom. Nobody can get much, it's all with God. But we have no fear of God. We love God, because he is the total wisdom. Whereas you guys are afraid because you think maybe the devil is the wisdom holder, the apple keeper. So you want a bit, but only on your terms. And that's why any genuine intellectuals that come along, you persecute them. You crucify them. You do a Jesus, or you do a Socrates, or you do endless witch persecutions. And so I used to have very interesting discussions with Dr. Zaki Badawi, and out of that emerged this thing. It's a medical condition. It's the fear or terror of wisdom. And I think the West suffers from it. What's the antidote? Well, you'll have to read the book. There are solutions. And it's education. So you're doing the right thing by studying sociology of ignorance. And if you do that for your master's degree, and I wish you all blessings for that.
Yeah, thank you.
It's exciting. Yeah. It's really important to study it.
I didn't write it down, this question, but what do you think is the medicine, the the solution against ignorancy. What do you think can we do against it?
Well, as I just said, education,
Education.
study. I mean, I'm a Confucian. You see, Confucius said this. He said, just study, learn the classics, read the commentaries on the classics, act them out. Don't just study them, live them, be humble. I mean, Confucius said that he'd spent his entire life studying and every single thing, and he only knew the tiniest fraction of what there is to be known, you know. Well, and that is true intellectual humility. I think with Herodotus, the poison is arrogance, hubris. That is the poison of history. And Herodotus is the founder of the science of history. And hubris is what brings down empires, it's what brings down powerful people like Hitler or Stalin eventually. So the antidote to hubris is humility. And that has to be grounded scientifically, you know, like that no one person can master all the details of all of this in any one single lifetime. It's just not possible, you know. And that, therefore, is a scientific humility, right? And therefore, we should respect and honour each other, share, learn what we can, love each other even, because with love we can learn more, right? And not seek to dominate or silence or control or suppress any of the forms of knowledge, you know. What Confucius did in his lifetime was go around the warring states of China and try and get all the sages to talk to each other, you know. His tradition is up here. We need a bunch of Confucians now to do that globally. We have to go around all the states and get everyone talking, which is what I've tried to do in my life, 35 years. So I think study, education, learning and humility, they're the antidotes to hubris, arrogance and ignorance. All
right, thank you very much. Today is a special day, it's the 21st December, it's Solstice.
Yeah.
What does this day mean for you? Why is it special for you?
Well, it's the 21st of December, right? So it's the winter solstice. A lot of my friends will be celebrating at different stone circles in the Druid community. Stonehenge has been shut, but they'll be as close as they can. King Arthur has announced he's going to go up as close as he can. These Druids used to build these stone circles to mark, and they were often aligned with the winter solstice and the summer solstice, because these old Celtic seers and shamans in other parts of the world followed the sun's course through the heavens and through the year. The calendar is really important. And the sun represents the source of life to us. And it is scientifically proved, you know, without the sun we would perish on this planet. It creates photosynthesis, which makes possible the oxygen we breathe, the forests, and all the animal life depends then on you know, photosynthesis for its survival. So every movement of my hand ultimately is traced back to the solar energy of the photon that lands on a leaf somewhere and that triggers an electron transfer that ends up being you know. So we now have the scientific knowledge to know that those old Celtic Druids and their solar worship were actually very wise, you know, and I think that's cool. And I love the sun. I actually, the other day on the terrace here in France, it was really warm. We had a warm spell. And I was sitting on the terrace sunbathing, like it was warm. And with your eyes shut, you know, like on the beach, you're looking at the sun, gazing at it through your eyelids. And just this warm, amazing being that is the sun. And to me, I mean, I don't understand it, but in my book on religious maths, I'm looking at the nature of consciousness. What is consciousness and consciousness studies? And how does the brain operate? It seems to me the brain, the neurons and all that, and the heart has some neurons too, they've discovered. I think they operate through some sort of plasma. I think consciousness is a sort of plasmic field that the brain can get working. So I think in a sense we're like, each one of us is little mini solar reactors. Am I saying the sun is conscious? Possibly. There was a talk given recently by Rupert Sheldrake, a friend of mine, who's a maverick physicist, biologist, scientist, who speculates maybe these stars, because our sun is only one of 100 billion stars in the galaxy, and then there's 200 billion galaxies, you know. Maybe these stars have some kind of consciousness, discuss, you know, and maybe they're twinkling and beaming messages at each other, like having a conversation. And we can pick up on that a bit with our little plasmic solar mind systems. And maybe 500 years from now, that'll be like taken as read. When you do your degree, that's what you learn in the first week. You know.
Maybe.
Possibly. So that's what the solstice means. It means the return of the light, the solar logos, okay. It's also the day of St. Thomas's Day. And St. Thomas is my favourite Gnostic Christian saint, because I've written this book called the Book of Thomases. Over the last 20 years, I've gathered random Thomases, visiting libraries, bookshops, museums, churches. You know, I'll see a plaque on the wall saying Thomas Dubbany, organist here at Winchester Cathedral or whatever, and I'll write it down. And I've written it down in my notebooks over 20 years, and then a couple of years ago I published it, first 3 volumes. And I argue that the original Thomas was the most Gnostic of the disciples. He was sent to India by Jesus, because I think Jesus was clever and realised Thomas was an intellectual, which is what the word Gnostic means. It means someone that wants knowledge, not just faith. I mean, I love faith, don't get me wrong, but faith without knowledge is dangerous. I could make up some, you know, crazy cult and have faith in it. But I can't do that if I also have knowledge, you know, and passes the reason test. So Thomas as the Gnostic disciple, I think close to Mary Magdalene and perhaps St. John and others, they were the sort of intellectuals in the Jesus set. And this is the book called the Book of Thomases. And there's never been a King Thomas, there's no kings in here, never been a Pope Thomas, no popes. But loads of philosophers and intellectuals, like Thomas à Becket, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Hobbes, you know, there's a whole list of thinkers, right down to today, you know. And all I've done is just name them and describe their work. And I think this is the proper church. I think the Thomas Church is the actual church. That Christ would have been said, yes, that's what I stand for too. Not the kind of warring, squabbling, sectarian, fighting over different types of faith. That to me is another form of stupidity or ignorance. And when you asked about the sociology of ignorance, you know, faith can lead to kind of ignorance. If you read, I just read the biography of Stalin and his ruthless persecution of Trotskyites and manufacturing enemies. I mean, his Stalinist faith fought the Trotskyite faith. You know, it's like the Cathars and the Catholics. I mean, it's bonkers. Whereas the true Gnostics stood for peace, I think. So to me, I think it's neat. I love the way time has these, it's like a conspiracy towards wisdom. So time has given us St. Thomas's Day on the day of the winter solstice when the light comes back. For us to, the Quran says, in the mysteries of God, there are many signs. Ayat is the Arabic. And so I think these are sort of signs from time. So that's why it's an important day for me, yeah.
All right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Right. Do you know any Thomases?
Yeah, some 2, 3.
Yeah.
Now one more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Okay, well there we are. I think no final questions or points to raise. I think.
No, I have posed my question,
Okay.
but there will be
There will be more.
there will be more. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, we'll finish there. Thank you for, you know, coming, sharing, asking.
Yeah, thank you.
And maybe we'll do another interview at the end of your stay, and we can, you know, you can ask. Other things will have arrived by then. Okay, right. Shalom.
Thank you.